Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. Imagine a leadership team that has spent months planning a bold transformation, every detail debated, every budget aligned. But when they finally announce it, the reaction isn't excitement. It's confusion, resistance, fear. In this episode, I'm joined by Giorgia Prestento, behavioral scientist and author of The Change Maze. And she's here to show us why change so often derails and how CTOs can lead through it with clarity and confidence. I'm your host, Adam Horner. I coach CTOs across startups and enterprises to lead with clarity, confidence, and strategic impact. And like many of you, I learned the hard way that leadership isn't just about technology. It's about people. That's why I created the CTO Playbook, a podcast and platform built for tech leaders like you. You can explore coaching, cohorts, and more at thectoplaybook.com. Your path, your pace, your playbook. Now, if leading change was easy, we wouldn't see so many change projects collapse into confusion. Giorgia, it's great to have you on the podcast. Now, most leaders think they know how to lead change, and yet so often it ends in, resistance, confusion, or even chaos. So why is it that change is so misunderstood, and what are we getting wrong about it?
Hi, I think the main reason is that we assume that human beings are rational beings. And instead is we have an emotional reaction to change. And I think that's the cause of many of the problems that we have in leading transformation. We assume that just by giving a rational explanation, a logical explanation of what the change is about, people will just automatically understand it. And instead, sometimes we forget to answer the most critical question, which is what's in it for me? What does it mean for my role, for my job, how I work with a team? All of those questions, that they are the first ones in our minds. We just don't assume that people, they just get it. And that applies to, most of the programs they have been working with. That misconception of the leaders thinking is a logical, financial, clear program. And people say, okay, yeah, I still don't get it. So that's one of the main reasons. The other one, I would say, that's different speeds.
Different speeds?
Yeah. So leaders, they spend a lot of time strategizing, discussing the change, making sense of it. And it may take them months. And by the time that they come to announce the change, they had the knowledge, they had the sense making, all of that is clear to them. And then suddenly it lands in people's, emails or on a town hall. And they don't realize that people, they need as much time as them to make sense of the change. And possibly even more because they're not in control, which is the third point. Any situation where we are not in control of, our life, what we do, what's expected of us, gives rise to this sense of uncertainty and anxiety. And that's the third reason why change is so difficult, because we don't consider those three very essential things.
Yeah, that time one is one that I've definitely seen before. And I remember in one organization, I almost likened it to the process of grief, in that people sort of have this attachment to the way that things are or the way that things have been. Leaders have had a lot of time to let go of that. So they've gone through many of the stages of grief first. And now they're at that stage where they're at acceptance on the other side of it. Whereas everybody else is still in sort of the shock moment. And that understanding that difference, I think, was one of the big steps that I took with that particular leadership team to help the whole. I mean, it was a small organization. We were talking about 15 people, but it was still really visible the difference in, you call it the difference in speed, but for me, it's sort of the stage of understanding or acceptance that they were at in that. So that really, really resonated with me there. So, you've been guiding organizations through these complex transformations for 20 years plus. So what was it that sort of first drew you into this world of change management?
It was by chance. And I think the best jobs happen by chance. I was on my first role, so I was just out of university. I think I was in the same company. After 2 years, there was a rotation and I got a job, which was called Business Improvement Manager. Didn't have a clue what it was, but it just seemed interesting. I got to travel around Europe and seemed a bit to be around fixing problems, which I like. And one of the first projects was about moving a team of ex-phone engineers from a back office, off the street function to actually answering customer questions.
Wow,
that
quite
was
a change.
yes. And I was completely naive. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Just my manager said, "Oh, that's an interesting project. It's going to be easy. Don't worry." And that was just my first experience of helping other people through a change. And as I said, I didn't have any tools. I didn't have any frameworks. So essentially, I talk with people. I would just sort of ask them, how they were feeling, what was going on, what they understood about the change. I had lots of cups of teas and coffees with people, and there was a lot of resistance. I mean, that was, just baptism with fire, you may say.
Yeah,
it was probably one of and it took some time. There was a lot of attrition. There was a lot of problems, but it just worked out at the end. And when I went back to see that team, one of the guys that was more resistant to change, he said, "Oh, thank you. I had lost motivation in my job. I didn't really care, but I found it again." And that hooked me to,
wow, what a feedback to get.
The work of change management. I still didn't know it was a discipline. Right. At the same time, I was studying an MBA. And one of the modules was called Change Management. I didn't have time to do any pre-reading. So I turned up 9 a.m. and suddenly dawned on me, there was just people wrote books about it. They studied, there was research, and that really helped develop, of course, my thinking. I learned the frameworks, I got a little bit more of the science of what I thought it was just common sense.
Yeah, those things you sort of picked up from first principles by just getting in and doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you've described it as something that can be navigated deliberately. And so I guess that was your moment to sort of realizing there is actually a science behind this. There's a method to it rather than just figure it out as you go along. Well, I mean, since then, you obviously written one of those books, which is the Master of Change Maze. And, that's already helping leaders around the world. So why did you think that now was the right time to write that book and add it to the canon of the change management world?
I think the prime motivator, it was seeing always the same issues coming up, seeing projects with misalignment between, what the program was set to achieve with an overall strategy, with a purpose, or seeing blind spots, things that you think, oh, we should have picked it up before, but we don't. Or understanding where resistance may come from, especially around, behaviors, around different cultures. There are so many things that we should, they should be part of the planning and we should pick them up before. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to write a book with all my learnings and hopefully help other leaders, identify those issues beforehand and hopefully prevent some of the problems that they occur way too often, especially in technology programs.
Yeah, there's something about technology change programs which seem to have a sort of a recurring theme to them, should we say? And there's often the same kinds of things come up and again. So was that was it specifically technology change programs that you see most of the challenge with, or is that just where most of the repeated mistakes are made, if you like?
I think they're everywhere. Okay. I picked more on technology because that's where most of the programs they're focused on.
Right.
Essentially, the big budgets, they go into, technology transformation. So you see it more often in there.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. If you got more of it, there's going to be more challenges.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, and the thing with technology as well, you have this dichotomy where the change is about technology, but the impact is across so many things that sometimes we don't think about it from the beginning. So you have a new technology, but then you realize, oh, we need new processes. the operating model may change because functions, they're going to work differently. And we may need different behaviors. We need people to be more collaborative. And, no tool is going to magically increase collaboration or innovation. There's so much work behind the scenes.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, the person who invents that tool is going to be a very rich person indeed. What I'd love to do is sort of take you back a little bit to some of the early change programs that either you led or that you worked on, and sort of help us to understand some of the big challenges that surprised you at the beginning. Not necessarily the ones that would surprise you these days, but the ones that surprised you when you first encountered them.
I think probably there's no specific example, but something that emerged over the years, which is the thing around behaviors.
Right.
Because, even, with all the frameworks and the models from the MBA and all the reading afterwards, there was just still something that was really, I couldn't grasp, which was why, despite all the tools that I had, why people were still not changing. And, that was the big question for me. And that's why I started learning more about psychology. I mean, you mentioned the grief curve, the Kubler-Ross, those models, I actually started finding they were more useful than, something, more structured. And because of this interest in psychology, I ended up wanting to learn more about behaviors, which led me to study my second master's in behavioral science.
Right. Okay.
And that really opened my eyes to, so much more that I didn't know about human behaviors. And one of the things that probably I think is at the core of, so many things that may go wrong is that essentially human beings, we have our primary instinct is survival.
Yeah.
And, we're not going to be chased by lions or, any other wild animals anymore. But if you can imagine when you were in a board meeting or you were under pressure with your CEO asking you what's wrong with the program, why are you delayed? I think the same instincts of survival kick in. And we just get the stress from there, reluctance to change, or we just need to very quickly having to come up with an answer. And I think that's one of the things that I learned the most, during my projects. For example, I was doing a people outsourcing program. So, we had about 240 people that we had to move from one company to the other. And, some of them, they've been working there for a long time. So there was a strong feeling of loss.
Right.
Should I agree to this move? Should I not? What does it mean? So that was, that was really challenging. And again, a lot of the effort was to just being open, explaining what's going on, what it meant for them, just putting yourself in, other people's shoes and, using that to make sure that they understood the change, not just the financial or technical reasons for it, but essentially what it meant for them as employees.
So making it personal so they could see where they fit in this world of change, both through the transition and also afterwards. Yeah.
Because one of the things that I think probably we'll talk about later when we go through the playbook, but it's understanding that future vision. What does the change look like? And that's something for the leadership to create. And it has to be explained in a way that it's going to make sense for people so they can start relating to it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that resonates with me because in my own experience leading, admittedly much smaller scale changes in startups, but resistance hasn't always been fierce, but clarity has been sort of the critical determining factor. Being absolutely clear on the goals and reasons has often helped sidestep or get away from chaos and stuff like that. I mean, from your perspective, why is it that clarity at the top so often gets lost in translation as change filters through the organization?
There's a couple of reasons. I think one of them is because essentially we all think in a different way. So even now, if we in our conversation, I may have an understanding of something, and you may have, same word, same sentence. You may think, maybe she means something different. And I think it's these differences which are driven by, our knowledge, expertise, all of things that we read, sometimes we pick them up really quickly, but other people that haven't had the same experience, and it takes longer. So that's one of the reasons, which I think brings us in the power of language as well.
Yeah.
Which is something that fascinates me as well. And again, when you explain the change or the vision of the change to people working in different functions, you need to translate it. And you need to make sure they make sense for that function. So if the change, for example, is technology, and you're talking with a team of salespeople, they see the world a little bit different. So if you use your technology perspective, they may find it more difficult to understand.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that going the other way around as well. If you have a change to a platform that maybe the technology is connecting to that they don't fully understand, unless you translating, I think is one thing, but I think there's also a level of interpreting what it means. There's going to be this change. Here's what it means for you, but also here's why it's important for you. That's what I mean by the interpretation layer. So it's not just translating from one language to another. It's also repositioning it on the other side of that sort of chasm of understanding, if you like. And it's something I've seen, again, it comes up for me in relatively small organizations. I can imagine in large organizations where you do have real actual language barriers, as in you need to translate from one language, national language to another national language, creates yet another challenge to overcome.
Yeah, and I think, there's the cultural differences, but the ones that I also find really interesting, and sometimes we don't recognize them, are the functional ones. I remember once I was in a meeting, I was asked to facilitate this meeting because so there was a technology engineering team and a marketing one that they were just struggling to understand each other. And that was causing delays, escalations. And once they started, I had about 10 engineers and 10 marketeers. And once they started talking, I just realized they were using words, English words, but they were interpreting them in different ways. They had an acronym that it meant different things for them. So it's not just national languages. So there's so much. And those are what I call some of the blind spots, those things that we don't consider, but they're going to have a major impact if you want to have a successful transformation.
Yeah. So assumptions about meaning, you can end up people, as you say, using the same words, but just on a different level with each other. But I love that sort of bundling it up as blind spots. I mean, there must be a bunch of other blind spots that people encounter as well. What are the other examples of blind spots and when we say blind spots, it's the non-obvious things, isn't it? It's the things that you wouldn't expect to look at. What are other examples of those that people come across and sort of trip themselves over with making changes?
Yeah, I mean, I have it just seems small, but I was running this project, leading the change, and I had 3 trainers that were supposed to deliver an SAP training to this large organization abroad. So it was really kind of difficult to get to. And the day before the training was due to start, one of the trainers fell sick. And the other 2 trainers, they didn't have that specific knowledge because they were trained on different functions.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so one of them was HR, one supply chain, and one finance. So you couldn't swap them. And suddenly I thought, okay, I have to fix this. I have about 400 people waiting for the training.
Wow.
Over a period of 6 weeks. And, how do I fix this? And I was a consultant, so I didn't know lots of people within the client organization. So there was, it was one of my blind spots because I never thought, what would happen if? And I think those are the questions that now I encourage leaders to ask before they start. Some of them I use what if scenarios. It could be what if the CEO resigns, or what if we have, there's a different regulation coming into the market. So some of them, they're like random what ifs that come up, and some of them, I encourage them to ask those questions among themselves as well.
Right. So some of them are sort of really kind of wild, out there ideas. Some of them are more pragmatic and practical. But
yeah.
I guess, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess the idea is to try and jump them out of this thinking that everything's going to be okay and just to start looking generally at risks around the change. Is that your approach there?
It is. And there's a really great tool to do that. Don't know if you come across the pre-mortem.
Yeah. Okay. Go on. Tell us about it from your perspective, because I've heard a few different ways of using the pre-mortem.
Okay, so the way you use it is to essentially to find out those blind spots. And what you do, after the plan is ready, after, everybody knows what's going to happen, you have a strategy in place, you gather all the people, key stakeholders in a room involved in the program, but also senior stakeholders. And you present this scenario, which is we are 1 year or 5 years in the future, things are going really wrong. The project has failed. We are in trouble. And then you ask them individually to come up with reasons why it's gone wrong.
Right.
And then you start discussing them. The benefit of this approach is that because you already tell them that it's failed, people don't feel the baggage of having to critique their colleagues or, critique their own project because, hey, I created a plan and it's perfect. So you remove some of that emotional attachment that people have with the program.
Right. So setting up that meeting is fairly important then in terms of the way you set the preconditions, saying it has already failed. It has gone wrong. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And that's essential. And you cannot attach it to any other meeting. It's standalone. So because you really need to get people in that frame of mind.
Got it. Right. So where they're looking for the reasons why it might have failed.
Yeah. And you can come up with things like, we had to roll out this new this system to field engineers, but they didn't have any iPads. Or the iPads were not working properly because they used to travel remote places. All those things that sometimes we just don't think about it.
Right. So I presume you have like a small set of probable areas that you could use as sort of conversation starters for those as well. Then, so if you is there a couple that you can think of off the top of your head that you use very regularly to say, well, imagine this happens? I mean, you mentioned the CEO resigning as being one. I can imagine that's actually a real risk with quite long programs. But I guess you got a couple of others that we could just have a look at quickly.
Yeah. So I mentioned, just new regulation is one of them. And, I used it recently just saying, what if, your product had to, was impacted by tariffs? Suddenly that's, just that's a really big change from, you may not be able to sell to a country that was one of your main ones. And that triggered a really interesting conversation, which was, should we think about our geographical strategy and, selling products in other countries and which countries we could sell? So, and that came up with just sort of that question that, was often used anyway. So it was not, can't claim, much originality in there.
But it's quite a practical one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Or, a lot of questions around, the cultural differences, assumptions that, the change is going to be perceived in a similar way, across the different countries. I mean, I once ran a project that impacted line managers and HR in 70 countries around the world. And it was, there were so many differences that, we didn't pick up at the beginning. So that's another question of my blind spots. How would people react in Brazil, for example?
Yeah. Because it's often not going to be the same as it is in a local market where there's different rules, different regulations, different normal, different things we expect as normal. Yeah, I mean, I had a change. We're going back sort of towards the pandemic now, where we ended up having to question a fairly fundamental thing in that we went through this change process, which was effectively laying people off. And the first change simply didn't work. Like it didn't move the needle enough. The books just weren't altered enough. So we had to go round back again and go, okay, well, it hasn't worked. What do I do next? And basically the answer was, well, let's repeat it. Let's lay off more people. And of course, one of the things we didn't think about at that stage was second time round is going to be way, way, way harder because now everybody knows what's coming, when it's, and so therefore they're going to be a lot more defensive. We survived it once. Why do we have to survive it again? And that was, as we went through that, I mean, that was the first time I'd ended up doing a big layoff with a client. But it was one of those areas where I was sort of thinking, okay, that's not something I want to repeat. Yeah. Because you sort of expect, okay, we run the playbook once, we can run the playbook again, but the conditions between the first time and the second time, by the very fact of having run it once, changed the preconditions for the second one significantly. And I didn't see that coming at all.
Yeah, you need to look at it as a completely different project because the context is different. And that's something that's really important to understand because, it's not maybe a blind spot as well. I don't normally look at it that way, but every situation is different. Every company has got, different culture, different ways of working, and all of those things, they impact how you manage a change. And, one of the things that I do in my workshop is just trying, understand what's the core of the culture and what it means. And if you overlay a change on top of that, what are the likely impacts and consequences?
Yeah, because that can be very different in different areas with different preconceptions, can't it? Absolutely. So this is probably a good point, actually, talking about playbooks, probably a good point to start running through the playbook itself. And starting at the beginning then of your playbook, we've got sort of 8 steps in here. So we're going to run through it with a little bit of speed to make sure we go through in a sensible amount of time. But just spending a little bit of time on each one. The very first place you start off, Giorgia, is with purpose. So talk to us about why we start right there.
Well, because essentially, if you don't know why you're doing something, what's the point? And it just sounds like really just simple. Every program needs to have a purpose. And, sometimes we get the purpose wrong, or as we were talking before, it makes sense to us, but does it align with the strategy? And I keep thinking about, start with why. It's been around for 15 years now. Yeah. And I think it's, many companies, they're still working through what's their purpose, or has the purpose changed? And have they changed with it? And, for example, you may want to implement a new ERP system and you say, just sounds good. We need an update, but what do you want to achieve by the end of it? It could be savings, efficiency, all of those things is just the purpose that you want to create.
But it also allows you to test at the end of it whether you've actually succeeded with your change as well, which is one of those things that I think some people think the change itself is the valid point, but actually often you want to have achieved your goals, your reason behind it. And that I think is essentially described by the purpose of the change.
Yeah. And that's why I'm just this massive advocate about measures. And sometimes it's not so easy to measure things. So, and to me, the purpose is, it's linked to, the future vision, it's linked to, the benefits, all of those things that they need to be super clear before you start. And that's why purpose together with alignment, I look at them as the foundations.
And alignment is the number 2 on your list, isn't it? So that is, so the two of those two go very closely together. Well, let's talk about alignment for a moment, because I've seen executive teams where I've seen great purpose and very clear understanding of what that is. And yet I've seen executives not be aligned on what they understand and they mean by the purpose. So what sort of tools or techniques do you use to either test or even better ensure that there is alignment around the purpose?
The main thing that I try to do, because it's not always very easy, is find out what are their key activities, the key programs. Because often you find that there are too many of them, too many initiatives, and every department, they got their pet projects or they have their priorities. So it's really bringing all of those together. Generally, I have this structured approach where I identify, let's say depending the size of the company, which are your top 10 programs, the ones where all, the budget is involved, most of the people are working on them, and then seeing, are they going in the right direction? It's kind of mind mapping, putting them all in, in the same charts and just see, okay, what are the synergies, or, are they in conflict? Are they moving us in the same direction? So that's what, the alignment is a bit of probably the more messy of the exercises I do, just because of the complexity of it. But generally, I find that is very useful exercise for the leaders that I work with, because suddenly they realize that they're doing two projects that they're not really matching together.
Yeah. I've seen it a few times as well, where you suddenly realize that they've got a couple of things going on that are actually pulling in almost opposite directions, trying to achieve opposite things. Cool. So we've got purpose and we've got alignment.
No, I was going to say, so then we get to diagnosis of risk, which is, the blind spots, organizational impact, and resistance. So those is about, finding out what may go wrong, essentially. And, we talked about blind spots, which is, asking all those, difficult questions. And sometimes there are also questions that, and those are the interesting ones. We kind of know the answer, but we don't want to admit it. And
the dragon's hiding in plain sight.
Yes, absolutely. And, just about finding out, you'll never be able to find all of them. But I think even if you pick up some, 2, 3, 4, 5 blind spots, that's enough to correct a lot of the issues that may happen in the future.
Right. That's a good metric to be able to look at then. Okay, excellent. So next we come to actually creating the impact, isn't it? So, and I think from that perspective, it's not just about the first order impact, but I often mention to a lot of my leaders, it's the second and third order impacts, the things that the knock-on consequences of the change.
Yeah, and those are the ones that, again, it just takes a lot of time to unearth. So you have all these different, I like using scenarios, the what if, or, testing, just doing a pilot, or even thinking about a pilot and see if we, let's say, implement this new CRM system, and you start thinking, okay, how would this team react? And, what would be the consequence? You sort of build this interesting, structure of, as you said, second and third order impacts. Because I have something that I've witnessed. It was not one of my projects. I just happened to be there at the time. It was a call center. And because they had lots of complaints of too many people waiting in the queue, they implemented a new process to encourage, all the call center operatives to answer as quickly as possible.
Right.
And, and they were just rewarded for it. And what happened, some of them, they started putting the phone down to a client they were talking with, because they'll just say, we need to have a really short queue. And, and nobody expected that. And that's why, see the impact of the change, especially on how people perceive the change, how you reward people for change is just so important in all of those organizational impacts.
Yeah, so that in that case, I guess they were looking at the length of the call without looking at the customer satisfaction at the same time, for example.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so organizational impacts, both the positive and the negative, are the key ones there. And then I think one of the things we often encounter as we go through change is people pushing back.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, we started a call on that. So a lot of it is, what's in it for me, and us as leaders not being able to help people understand the impact it has on them, the big why question and the purpose. Also, sometimes something that we don't realize, for example, is things like threat to competence. So if we ask people to do something different, the initial reaction is, oh, what if I can't do it? What if I cannot learn a new skill, or what if I don't fit into the new team? And those are sometimes even people, they will not call it, oh, I feel threats in my competence. So you sort of need to make assumptions or try and guess what the causes may be, and then validate it with the people through conversation, focus groups, to see whether that's the right reason. And based on that, you formulate, the correct intervention to help people through the resistance.
Yes, I think resistance is one of those things that is often anticipated, but not all the correct directions of resistance are actually anticipated very well. I think one of the simple ones is just straightforward people, putting their foot down and just refusing to change. I remember one organization, there was a merger between two organizations, which is obviously a fairly significant change. And as part of that, the leadership kind of assumed, they'll sign a new employment contract with the new company that will just put some terms in there that make it clear. And then they were absolutely blown away when only 1/3 of the people actually signed their new employment contract. And of course, then they're a bit stuck. They're still employed with the old company. They won't sign a contract with the new companies. They have to go in and make an intervention to change something. So I think anticipating resistance and how you might sensibly overcome it is a fairly key point of change management, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, what may work in a situation, it may not work in another one.
Yeah.
Even on the merger and acquisition you describe, it may be that a team or a department, they say, okay, yeah, I think it may work here. But then, if you use the same approach with a different department or a different country, you'll just, you find the resistance arising. So one of the things that we tend to do is to look at, change impact assessment, where you identify, what the resistance may be, what the risk across different geographies or different groups of employees.
And is that something you can do fairly academically and just sort of think through what would be the resistances? For example, you talked about the pre-mortem here. Is that something that can bring those up? Or is it the case that most of the time you need to bring in somebody who's got the experience, who's been through a bunch of change programs before, in order to bring up the most likely scenarios for resistance to change?
I think it's a mixture of the two. So, having worked in a lot of projects in, different locations, different companies, probably there is a set of resistance. I thought, okay, these are very likely. But then I need to talk with, stakeholders, with people in the organization to understand their culture. So it's just a mixture of the two. And, sometimes it depends on the processes, depends on which part of the company. And sometimes they're like really small things. I remember we just, it was a global project, but there was this thing in Hong Kong or China where, for example, an employee who never go to the line manager to ask a question.
Oh, okay.
Or because they will feel like if they see me asking a question, it may imply I don't know my job.
Right. So it's a cultural behavior. Right. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, all that information, the communication we had for all over the world said, if you have a problem, ask your line manager. And we just had to change it. Just say, there is a nominated contact, your peer, and you have to go and ask this person. And it's a small thing, but that had an impact on resistance and how the change was implemented in the country.
Wow. Yeah. So sometimes experience really does pay on these ones then. Brilliant. Yeah. And I think the next one on the list is one of the ones that I love because I love numbers. I love tracking things. Indicators.
It's a bit of a nightmare. I don't think often companies that have the right data. I think, and I'm referring both, the ability to measure the impact of the change,
right,
but also, other metrics around the use of a system or, tracking how people are using a process. And sometimes, I keep asking, or especially from a, change adoption, you want to know how people perform before and after, what their perception of the change is, their perception of the process before and after, or if they believe this is going to help the customers more or less. And sometimes it's just difficult to have, the data.
Yeah.
Or being able to measure it. especially after having done my master in behavioral science, which was so much data that you need to collect to prove, your hypothesis, really having to work with companies. Well, they said, oh, we'll just do it at the end of the project. We'll work something out. And I said, no. Before, we need to start right now identifying the right measures. Generally, I tend to ask them, not many of them, like 4 or 5, because just keep it simple.
Yeah.
And understand which are the ones that actually are going to measure the real impact.
Good. I can imagine that helps massively with planning, but I can also imagine in many organizations, those measures probably have to be tracked for the first time when you want to go through a change process.
Yes.
Good. And then closely related to indicators is understanding that things have actually worked. So validation that things have actually, achieved the outcome you want. Yeah. Sometimes it's a very binary thing that, the change is completed. We have transitioned from one platform to another, for example. And in other cases, it's a lot less obvious. We've removed a company from the company tree hierarchy or of group companies or something like that, which is sometimes almost invisible to the majority of people.
Yeah. Indeed. And with validation, actually, I also take a step back and think, after we have all these things in place, we know the blind spots and the alignment, I always ask, leaders, okay, let's check everything again. So we have all those pieces of a puzzle. Did we set them up in the right way? So to me, that's the first step of the validation. Because there's a lot of work to create, all this, the plan and the strategy. So that's to me is the first part of the validation.
Right.
And then it's, okay, did it work? Which is about, again, it starts from the beginning. So with your future state, the future vision, and measuring, did we actually achieve that? And all the list of benefits that we were expecting, have we met them? Have we got? And sometimes you just get a bit close, you don't get all 10 of them, but you'll just say, okay, we got like 4 of them completely, 6 of them are on our way there. Or maybe one will never achieve it. That's why I always put a lot of emphasis on the process, just making sure, probably you relate to this, that you use a playbook, you follow your steps. And sometimes it works great. Sometimes it works a bit less. But I think, having that, focusing on the process is really important.
Yeah. And related to that, then, of course, is the last, but probably one of the most important stages, which is execution. So you've done all that planning then, and let's just actually go through and do the change, make the change, make the system update, or whatever it might be. And that stage for most people is the main part of it. But on your playbook, it's almost like a little addendum on the end of it.
Yeah, it is. And it's, which is ironic because I spend most of my time, in execution,
right.
Helping, making the change happen or fixing any issues. But I decided to just, for my playbook and, the work that I'm interested in doing with leaders is how much can I help in advance?
Yeah.
Because, the more we identify before, the less sleepless nights you're going to have halfway through the project. Because, things go wrong. Absolutely. I was talking yesterday, I was at an event yesterday. So it's not a client, it's just somebody else. And she was telling me it was a law firm. And she was telling me how badly a change has gone, and it was so bad they got rid of the CTO. So this is, to me, that's why I feel so passionate about the planning and making sure that we are best placed for success right from the start.
Absolutely. So, the last thing we want to be doing is losing our job as a CTO. So let's quickly recap the playbook then to make sure we've got all the correct steps in there. So we're going to start off with number 1 with purpose. Make sure we know what we're doing. And as you said, closely related to that is number 2, which is alignment. Make sure all the people around the leadership of that are aligned to that purpose. Step 3 then was watch out for the blind spots. Make sure we know, they're at least explored what are the things that we don't know. Number 4 was the impacts on the organization. Obviously, the predicted ones from the change, but what are sort of the second order and third order effects of the change? Then number 5 on the list we had was resistance. Anticipate the resistance and understand where that's going to come from and what we can do about it. Number 6 was indicators, an idea of how we are tracking progress, what we're going to do to make sure that things are on track. Number 7, validation, understand what our actual achievement of our goals looks like so we can validate it at the end of it. And then number 8, execution, which if we got all the rest of the planning right, that should be the smoothest part of it, not the nightmare part of it.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything out there, Giorgia?
No, perfect summary. Thank you.
Excellent. Great stuff. And if people want to get hold of you, Giorgia, I mean, obviously there's your book. Where can people find your book?
It's on sale on Amazon or your local bookshop. So it's you can find it in there. And, I'm also happy to offer an online copy to your to people watching your podcast. So we can share a link to that.
Fantastic. That'll be much appreciated. We can put a link into the show notes so you can fetch that right now from the bottom of the...
Because this is about, spreading the word, and I just want, more CTOs being aware of, there's help out there in terms of, improving how we plan for the change. That's
wonderful of you to do that. Thank you very much, Giorgia. And in terms of people getting hold of you to find more of that help, how can people get hold of you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so that's my website. So it's giorgiaprestento.com. So it's if you get the spelling right, then it's a unique name. Just connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll find, from there, probably you can just find, everything, all the links to what I do, which is, I advise leaders on change management. I run workshops to put together, all the different elements of this playbook. And I coach leaders as well. Sometimes, same as you, people, they just want to have a conversation, bounce off ideas in an environment, without just that pressure of being in a group.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, brilliant. So there's all of that available on your website. And you, as I understand it, you also have a test for people as well. So if they're not sure on their change process, they can go there. And what will the test help them do, Giorgia?
I think it takes less than 3 minutes. So, and it's got all those questions to identify where out of 3 categories where you may need to focus on. So it looks about leadership, leadership style in change, team capability, and organizational readiness. So you'll just get a score and you get personalized results after answering these questions.
That sounds like a fantastic use of 3 minutes.
Yeah, I know. So, initially I thought, I'm just going to ask lots and lots of questions to make it very comprehensive. And then I decided that we're all very busy. So, and I think you get, from the feedback that I have, you got really insightful results in just less than 3 minutes of your time.
That's brilliant to know. Thank you very much, Giorgia. We'll put links to all of those in the show notes. And I always ask this question of every guest I have on the show. And that's if you were to be sat down in front of a CTO who's just coming into the role, maybe then their first, maybe their second role as a CTO, and they're coming up against something that looks like change management, what would be the one single piece of advice you would give to that CTO to help them?
Pause and let's answer some questions.
I think that's a good advice for many scenarios. Fantastic, Giorgia. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Lovely talking with you.
Excellent. And we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate your time. So just before you go, I'd like to ask you for a favor in return for putting together this episode of the CTO Playbook for you. Please share the episode with just one person who will appreciate it. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or another platform, sharing the episode will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great content. Remember that you can find more information on the CTOplaybook.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.